having the studio helped me in my grief process too with my dad, because I mean, he passed away on May 9th. I had the keys on May 1st. So it literally was like a transition. And when I was a kid, he had an audio studio in Chicago, and it was called Fabus Sound. And he combined the words together. So he brought me in there and we would record. I would go in the booth. So I love that. But it reminded me of those times. And now with him, you know, as he would say, transitioning, I'm transitioning into who I am meant to become. And I'm ready to go off and do this. So I actually just opened my studio, Fire Media House. It's in Coram. That was a dream that I had, I think, back when I was 4 years old. My dad actually introduced me to the world of like audio, and he was a musician. And unfortunately, he just passed away last month.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. But it was almost as if he like handed me the keys and then said, "Go, you're ready. You don't need me anymore," or whatever. I mean, that's like maybe a horrible thing to say, but he really meant a lot to me. And like I said, he had really opened up that world to me. But I actually didn't go on that course initially. I actually got into the medical field where I became an operating room nurse. I was a surgical technologist, and then I transitioned into teaching. But I always had that fire, like that pull for, you know, podcasting or photography. I just really love creatives and getting people together and, you know, exploring, you know, creativity and feeling comfortable. So it really is also a, if not now, then when type of mentality. The other reason being, and not a lot of people know this about me, and I really, the last few months, I've really started to open up and share about it, but I actually have a vocal disability. And 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare form of thyroid cancer, and a doctor told me, you may never speak again post-surgery. It was one of the risks. And also I may not have the vocal strength to speak publicly anymore. So when you're faced with a choice like that, where in the past maybe you didn't go for it, you didn't speak up, you didn't do the thing that you wanted to do, suddenly you're faced with not having the option, it becomes different. So that was another thing that sort of propelled me to take that leap into this business world.
So you have such an incredible story so far, and we just heard the first 3 minutes of it. But I'm curious, just to elaborate or just to clarify, did you start the media house before or after the surgery?
It was after.
So were you compelled now that, like, for example, that fear you may never talk again, or the opportunities you may have never taken,
Yeah.
was one of the propelling forces to, hey, I want to do the things that I actually want to do?
Definitely was, because that literally, if you think about, if someone told you that you post-surgery, there's a big risk that you'll either have incredible vocal damage, or which could lead to paralysis or something like that. I mean, not to get like super medical or anything, but, and also being a nurse too, I understood the risks. It just made me realize, like, what are we living here for, if not to do the things that are put inside of our hearts that may have been there for, you know, since you were a kid. It could have been a recent thing, but there's a reason. I really believe there's a reason that those things exist. So I just felt like I had to take the risk to do it.
So tell me about the transition process. You were a nurse. You underwent surgery. Thank God everything, I'm assuming, went well.
Yes.
I mean, you're still talking. So.
Yes, I am. I am.
So that being said, so what was the transition of, okay, I'm going to move on from my nurse position, which, by the way, just a little caveat, my wife is a labor and delivery nurse.
Oh, nice.
So I have
I love that.
a special place, you know, for nurses out there.
Yeah.
You have to deal with some crazy people. So, although maybe yours might have been asleep when you were dealing with them.
Yes, but it's a different, every unit has its own thing. We got a lot of like C-sections and things, so they would transition from L&D to like into the OR. So, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, we saw some things.
I bet. Yeah. Absolutely. So what was the transition process? What was the, outside of the surgery, how did you say, okay, I'm ready to make this leap? Because one of the things that I think people maybe don't see up front is, hey, I have a steady paycheck. I have a 403B probably at that point, or 401k, whatever the case may be. But like, I have a steady paycheck. I have a retirement. Everything's all set. And now I'm completely self-employed, and there's no vacation pay. There's no overtime pay. There's no sick time.
Yeah.
It's scary. There's no reliability of income.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that
That's
transition.
true. That's very true. And even if you have money saved, which I did, you still have that thought process because you don't want to sit back and relax either. You want to have kind of that fire under you to keep going. I just really think that I had reached the end of my rope at this position. I was clinical and then I transitioned into teaching. So I taught for 7 years to have students go into the operating room, more or less. And it started to become a toxic work environment. I didn't feel supported. We weren't getting raises. It just felt very unfair for people who had given a lot of service and it just wasn't recognized. And then the students also, they didn't feel heard. And I, as an instructor and as a nurse, I feel like you're naturally an advocate. You know that you're going to care for patients, but if you have to step up and talk to a surgeon face to face, like you have to be willing to do that because it's the right thing to do. And I felt that I had done that for the students and I wasn't being heard. So that aside, the writing was on the wall, basically. It was like, okay, it's time maybe to try this thing that I know I'm supposed to do. And when I did make that choice, that's when the doors opened. I felt like whatever you want to say, the windows open, the doors open, the hinges flew off or whatever. And I immediately found a commercial space that was perfect for what I needed. Had never actually been used before, but it was the right size. Everything about it I loved. It just was my vibe too. And it allowed me to put my own stamp on things. So it's new, so we're still currently souping the place up and getting it ready, but there's something also magical about keeping it minimalistic because then people can come in and sort of make their own way and do whatever they want to. So it's kind of nice to have that space I can do what I want in there, but I like to make things modular so they can be changed into other things. But to go back to the original question, it's you've just really got to go for it, and hopefully, you just have to have the mental strength, I think, to stay the course as well.
Tell me about first of all, the lease process, because that must have been a scary process as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, not only are you starting a new business where you have to find clients, now you're taking on a monthly expense of a lease.
Yes.
I think I would like if you could elaborate a little bit on your role and as like what your business provides for clients.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a all-encompassing creative space. It's my dream is that it's a podcasting studio, but it's also a photography studio or a space where people can do educational things like a lighting workshop. We actually had a lighting workshop there recently, brought photographers in. So the main service right now that I'm providing is the space because strangely enough, even here in Long Island, there is not a lot. Or it's abnormally expensive, or it's in Manhattan somewhere and it's like $500 an hour, and which is great if you need that for a certain look or something. But for the common person, having the opportunity to have a space where people can go in and then just experiment with photography or have the ability to create a podcast or something like that. I'm also providing the equipment as well. You can either have the equipment or not, but the availability is there. So it's really just a space for creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking beforehand and even through our messaging that I'm in the process of moving studios, and trying to find a studio space on the island is crazy. It's very, very hard. So I actually ended up renting out like the first floor of a building essentially. But that being said, like it's still a commercial space. Like now I have to build that studio, but and thankfully that we're at this point where we're able to. But if you're just starting out, what do you do? Like I didn't want to have people come into my home. I just a lot of people do that, but it just wasn't the vibe I was going for. And if you could swing that, that's the best because you walk downstairs and your studio's there. But like I just didn't want that, and so if there were things, they weren't local at all. I didn't want to have to travel an hour to get to the studio.
Right.
So providing the opportunity for people where they have, and also now I run a media business, so I have all the equipment.
Yeah.
For people that don't have the equipment, now we're talking tremendous investment to get the cameras, get the mics. Now, of course, you can do it on your iPhone, and it would be fine because a lot of stuff is done on an iPhone. But you go in for a certain style of professionalism, there is a bit of a a price gap to get into the
Yes.
spot, you know, and also even more so find the right location for a store.
Mm-hmm.
So you were there is definitely a need for the service you were providing.
Yeah. And I also want to talk about something you were mentioning before about, stepping out and doing this when there's a risk involved. I really believe in timing as well. And as I mentioned, I waited. I mean, I could have done it earlier, but I don't think the same power would have been there had I done this like 10 years ago. Could have done it, but I don't know. There's just a vibe or something that I just needed to wait. I needed to keep going through whatever I was going through. Went through the cancer process too. Maybe that was part of me coming into my own and transforming so I could have this space and really understand the meaning behind it. I mean, that's more of like the creative side of things, where you think like philosophically and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I try to be sensitive to that, and it literally did work out where, it actually, having the studio helped me in my grief process too with my dad, because I mean, he passed away on May 9th. I had the keys on May 1st. So it literally was like a transition. And when I was a kid, I mean, I think I was 4, he had an audio studio in Chicago, because I originally am from Chicago, and it was called Fabus Sound. And he combined the words together. So he brought me in there and we would record. I would go in the booth, and I even have recordings from that time. So I love that. But it reminded me of those times. And now with him, as he would say, transitioning, I'm transitioning into who I am meant to become, and I'm ready to go off and do this.
Yeah.
So it means a lot.
You mentioned before that you had a story. The story you want to share, was that the story, or was that?
Well, that's one of them. I have another one if you want to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear it.
I got a few. So funny enough too, so maybe this was another little like nod. I had the opportunity, and this was a really cool opportunity, to go to Paris and walk in Fashion Week there for a designer. And I did that. It was really amazing. And actually, let me back up. Before I left, I had a camera, and I'm like, I'm not really using this thing. Like, I'm going to sell it back to Adorama. Just get some extra money, whatever. I sold it back. And I said, if I am meant to shoot a camera again, it will come back to me in some way. Well, little did I know that when I was in the airport in France, waiting for my plane, right before I went through security, I'm like, I got to go to the bathroom, as women do at times. And I went into the stall, and it was a single stall. And I opened the door, and there was a Canon camera hanging on the hook. And initially, I wasn't like, oh, yes, a camera. I'm like, oh, this is someone's camera. Let me try to find them. I looked at some of the photos in there, and it was just like a family vacation, thankfully. And so,
This is a great story so far, but it would have been even better if there was some other crazy stuff on.
Yeah. Well, I didn't go through all of the photos. I went through like the first 50 just to see. And because I wasn't through security yet, I was like, okay, I'm just going to wait outside this bathroom, because they must have just left it. Like, the person literally had to probably just have left or something. And so I took it, because I'm like, if anyone should take a camera and understands the value of it, whatever, I'm going to take it and hopefully give it back to them. So I waited for 45 minutes, an hour outside of the bathroom, just waiting for someone to come. No one came. And I looked up on the app the map of the airport, and the lost and found was in this other terminal that I had to take a taxi to, which would put me in the position where I would miss my flight. So I was like, okay, I will, because there's a way to take some of the photos, you can post them online. I think it's called like findmycamera.com. They could take like the geolocator, or the like where it was taken, and you can search for your camera that way if someone puts it there for you to find.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought, okay, I'm just going to keep this. I'm going to go through security. And then I started thinking, like, as they're telling me to take out my camera and put it through the security, I'm like, well, what if there's a bomb on this thing? Like, what if, this is something crazy? But it wasn't, luckily.
That would have been some story.
That would have been an even crazier story. So long story short, I posted the photos when I got home. Me and my husband, we tried to find the person. We posted multiple, because you could like put people's faces and stuff, and no one claimed it ever. So I still have it. But that was kind of got me thinking, like, well, the camera, it literally came back to me. Like the exact camera that I sold came back to me. It was actually an earlier version by like a couple years, but same thing. It's a Canon.
That's pretty remarkable, man.
Yeah.
Serendipity behind that.
Yeah,
I
totally.
believe in God, and for me, that's just it's just like I think a wink from God kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't like personally, I don't necessarily believe in coincidences, and I think
Mhm.
that all things happen for a reason.
I do.
And
Mhm.
it's really interesting. I have plenty of the stories myself. Like it's just like, all right, I guess this is
Yeah.
okay. I hear you loud and
Yeah.
clear, kind of
Yep.
thing.
Yep. Mhm.
That's pretty cool. So let's talk clients, because I'm curious. You open up your the media house, and where do you begin? How do you get your name out there? How do you get people in your doors?
So what we did, I have a friend who does a lot of photography and workshops and things, and we decided to bring one of those workshops into the studio because that was also an issue, like finding locations to do these lighting workshops. Can't always do them in a forest somewhere. Like you have to have a place. And so doing that, we were able to bring in just, people to know that this place exists. And now also with social media, that's helpful as well. And now with, the lighting workshop, there were models that came in. We've since had a few shoots since then. They also tag as well, so their network starts to hear about it, and then it just becomes an option on the table. And this is only the beginning. I have a tendency to overwhelm myself because I have a lot of, vision for what I want to do. And I really prefer things now to be organic, instead of this huge marketing campaign, which does help and is necessary, I think. But instead of micromanaging, just sort of letting people come in and create the space based off of feedback, what vibes I'm getting, who I'm getting in the doors, have my own mark on it. But as I mentioned, I was really thinking about, oh, I need to do the floors like this. I need to paint the walls here. I need to bring this plant in. And it's like, well, that's great, but is that needed right now? Is that the distilled version of what I need to start my business?
Yeah, I think that we can sometimes. I just had a conversation yesterday. We didn't actually talk about the fact, like a little bit of my backstory is I had a 3 or 4 year stint on YouTube where YouTube was my main job,
Oh,
making
cool.
YouTube videos.
Yeah.
But I bring that up to say that people would see my setup that I had 4 years in,
Mhm.
and it was my full time job. Like it was paying for my mortgage, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
right? So people be like, oh, I want to start a YouTube channel, but I want my studio to look like yours. I'm like, yeah, but I've posted thousands of videos. I've posted for years at this
Hmm.
point. I mean, it's been my job for years. I've even posted before that, right?
Hmm.
Go look at my first video.
Yeah.
And like you look at
Hmm.
what the studio looked like then. I was filming on my iPhone, and it was like above me. I didn't even know anything about lighting. My face was completely overexposed, right?
Hmm.
I just made a video, another video, and then another video, and then I bought one camera, and then I
Hmm.
bought a year later another camera, and then it was an investment over time. And
Yeah.
that's what I tell other people when they would say things to me. But I have a tendency on the other side to be like,
Hmm.
well, this is exactly what I want. That's the final, for example, like this new
Hmm.
setup of the studio,
Hmm.
the final product to look like, and I want
Yeah.
to just say everything now. And it's
Yeah.
like, all right, well, I should probably take my own advice.
Yeah.
And so it's a good reminder, the distilled version, what's really needed right now,
Yes.
and then we can
Prioritize.
work up to what we want to get to.
Yeah. And especially if you've had experience like that where you know what's possible or you know what you want to work towards, sometimes it's hard to pull back and say, okay, I really just need one light. I don't need a five lighting setup or whatever, five light setup. I don't need all of these. I don't need pro photo. I could do like, I don't want to, I shouldn't say that, like throw people under the bus or whatever, but I mean, are modifiers. Some are better than others. Let's put it like that. You don't need like the top of the line to start because I think people get down a rabbit hole. I mean, I've done it myself, but at the same time, did that help me with storytelling? Like, did that help me to create an image? The best things that I've ever done have been like one light, natural light, like limited, costuming or whatever. Because I like frilly things. I don't know why, but like those one light shots, I'm actually really obsessed with, like hard lighting, just one light. Like I digress into that, but that sometimes can tell the story that needs to be told. And it's hard when you're excited and you're just starting out, because I've met people like that too. And that's also that like classic statement of like, oh, well, your camera takes great pictures. Like, let me get the exact same camera so you're suddenly going to be like Peter Hurley or something, or it's suddenly going to be a magical thing. But notwithstanding, like you've got to learn the
I
backstory of that.
completely understand where you're talking about.
Yeah.
Coming from a music background, I did a lot of on the music channel, or
Mhm.
the YouTube channel I had. I had a music podcast, and I'd speak to all these
Yeah.
different industry professionals. And one of the things they all kept saying would be like the fact that like people would ask, oh, what kind of gear do you use? What makes, and some of these people had like, Grammys and stuff. And they were like,
Wow.
they were like, what, I want to sound just like you. And the overwhelming response by all of them was like, you can get all that, like, and this is not, it wasn't prideful. It was like humility, like that they came from the bottom as well. It's like, you can buy all the same gear, you can buy all the same, effects and everything, but you can't buy the 40 years of experience that I've done. And the reason that I'm getting these sounds is because I've done this for 40, it's the same concept of like, you just got to start with what you have and then progress to maybe the next level.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very interesting. So I'm curious now though, one thing I actually want to piggyback on is you said, you had this passion for a while, but like, for example, 10 years ago, you could have started, but you didn't. And everything happens for a reason. We're kind of talking about that same thread of things. And what I find interesting too is the whole media space was a totally different animal 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
For example, podcasting's been around for probably 15 years, but now everybody has a podcast.
Right.
And I'm not one to talk, right?
Yeah.
But like, as we're sitting on mine, but
some are better than others.
Well,
so,
hey, and you could be talking about somebody else.
Well, you're right.
I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. But my point being though is that now that creates an opportunity for you where that might not, the podcasting space, there might not have been much of a market for you 10 years ago. And it's just interesting that we go back to the thread of like things happen for a reason. The media space has become incredibly democratized at the moment, in the sense of anybody can be a content creator, which is good and bad, right?
Yes.
So that being said though, since anybody can be a content creator, anybody can be your client.
True.
Or we can rent out the space, right? And it's a really interesting opportunity that it presents itself for you now compared to 10 years ago.
Exactly.
So you mentioned organic, and so I'm curious, like organic marketing, essentially just people coming through the doors, reposting it. That drives enough business right up front, or how did you had a rent to pay? So how did that work?
Well, that's not technically sustainable until it's at a certain level. So right now, I think I'm just focused more on awareness of the space. Of course, as things progress, I would love for people to still tag and things like that. But I mentioned not having this huge marketing campaign, but I think there has to be at least some direction or some thought process behind that. Because sometimes people, get excited about something and then there's no plan really to back it up. And I'm sure you know this, especially in anything related to cameras turning on and things that are live, there's unexpected things all the time. I actually, yeah. And this is kind of a weird aside, but I competed for many years in martial arts, and I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, and I competed, and it felt like every time I went to a competition, there was something that happened that, like, I was driving to the competition, had to be there at a certain time, and there's suddenly a freight train. And so I had to sit with myself and know that I had to shift and change plans a little bit, A, B, or C. Those things, I think, helped me to realize that even with the best planning, you can't always prepare for everything. So that's why let's just say I'm embracing the organic side of things more as something that is not just something I would pass over.
Sure.
I really want it to mean something. And yes, there's planning, but I think the most authentic version of the business or me is sometimes just being in the moment. And yes, you're drawing from your experience, but you're trusting, like you're mentioning about like believing in God. Sometimes you have to just trust that he's got you. Like, you can't see all the steps, and there's a reason it's called faith, so it's like, but
don't get me started on that. I hear you.
I'm back for another one. We talk about that all
I know that all too well.
Yeah.
As a compliment to you though, I've spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs, and one of the threads of entrepreneurs is the willingness to take that leap of faith when you don't necessarily have the full plan. And I think that that's a really interesting, I don't know, what would we call it, marker of a true entrepreneur and somebody that maybe has entrepreneurial ideas or tendencies, is that willingness to take that leap of faith, first off. And second off, that they don't have to necessarily have the whole plan. Because I know a lot of people that I want to open a food truck, I want to do this, but they have to have every single thing in order, and then they never do it.
Yeah.
And what I end up finding through all the conversations that I have, and even outside of these, I love asking questions. That's why podcast is perfect to me. That I've just people say, "Oh yeah, I didn't have all the details worked out, but I knew that this is what I was meant to do or what I wanted to do." And what I really actually admire about you, what you're saying is, and I think actually more people can learn from this, is I think I like the idea of saying, this is the vision that I have, but I'm not going to hold super tightly to the vision, and I kind of want to see what it's meant for.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually really like that, because I've found this podcast is a perfect example of this.
Mm-hmm.
I had a vision of what I thought it was going to be. And within the first, I mean, you're probably episode 45,
Mm-hmm.
46, somewhere between 40 and 50. Um, Between episode like 5, I was like, oh, this is, in a good way, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
this is so different than I thought the direction we were going to go in. And
Yeah.
if I had just white knuckled, no, this is what it's supposed to be. Like, I think it's a way better position now
Yeah.
than my vision was so short minded, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, like, if I had just stayed with that, I think the podcast would have had the opportunities that it's having now. Where
Yeah.
I really like the flexibility that you have with the business. I think it's a really cool business model, and also just mindset.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more of like the nitty gritty side of
Mm-hmm.
business.
Okay.
Are there any services or applications or products that you use that streamline the back end of your business?
Premiere Pro.
Tell me about it.
Well, I mean, as a solopreneur still, like I'm doing a lot of the back end work. I recently started exploring like editing options because that's also part of me kind of letting go of control as well, because it saps a lot of time. I love editing because I think it is like a form of storytelling. It's one of my favorite parts. But, when you're moving things like 1 millisecond or something one way or the other and you can't decide and it's like 2:01 a.m. and you got to get up in 3 hours or something, it's like I can't sustain this anymore. So software like that, digital software, is really my friend. I have some digital like bookkeeping software as well, which I am just starting to get into because I need to really understand, because I formed an LLC. I just decided to like do it that way. So, because I feel like eventually maybe I would hire somebody, or I wanted to protect myself too. I'd rather just bite the bullet and learn it now and just at least be more prepared, even if I never hire anybody or something, but I hope I do. But yeah, anything that's digital is helpful. And also, this is another thing. I love having like a legal pad. This is something from my grandfather. He was a defense attorney actually, and he had like probably hundreds of legal pads. And I've always loved that idea that you can brainstorm, you can get it out of your head. Because I tend to like overthink about things, or just there's so many things or ideas that I have. And sometimes when I write it down, it alleviates that, but it also shows me, is this something worth pursuing? Where there's no pressure on that. So these other things, they're like for a purpose, get something presented or something. But for that, it's like just my personal chicken scratch,
Yeah.
I guess.
What does your day-to-day look like?
So I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she is the love of my life, but she's got to go to school. And so I usually drop her off, or my husband does, and then I will either exercise, because that's another thing I've been finding is exercise is hugely important. It keeps my mind balanced, and the things that were seemingly crazy maybe the day before, once you're done exercising, it's like, oh wait, that's not even a thing. Like, let's move on from that.
I couldn't agree more to that statement.
Yeah.
First thing in the morning is what I
Yep.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been getting into morning exercise more. I used to be a night person, but not anymore. But that helps me to focus.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Actually, I heard a interesting thought. I think it was probably on Reddit. And it was that distractions, and they're just saying this as a figure of speech, not in reality, but distractions are a form of hypnosis. And I found that really fascinating because of a lot of the things that go through my mind, or I'm trying to focus on something and emails come in, or I hear something, or I want to think about something else. It sort of has that effect of like sort of hypnotizing you to get off course in a way. So I don't know why I really said that, but it just was an interesting thing to say, because I think sometimes even if you have the drive to do something, you can get derailed very easily just by simply being distracted with things. And that can hurt a business, I would say.
Even getting distracted with things that are seemingly important.
Yes. Yeah.
As silly as this sounds, I think that priorities are really important. And whether it be inside of your business, like depending on how nitty gritty you want to get, right? But just what are the priorities inside of the business? You know, is this actually like, is me spending this time that I think is important actually really genuinely
Yeah.
important to the business and actually moving the needle? Does it actually need to get, or on the opposite, sometimes I'm like, oh, that's not that important, but actually it really could be important. You kind of just procrastinate it when it could
Yeah.
really actually be beneficial, but also prioritizing things in your life. You
Yeah.
know, like where does this podcast sit on this on the priorities in my life? Am I
Yes.
prioritizing it over my family? Am I, you know, and trying to make, because sometimes I can. I'm like, no, I gotta, and I was like, wait, hold on, that's like, the podcast is great, but like my family comes first.
Yeah.
You know? And like, if you don't think about it, you just kind of go through the daily motions of life. Sometimes, you know, like a little split like this, all of a sudden, like, you know, you turn a boat on a little course and 20 miles away, now you're all the way over
off.
there.
Yeah.
And you don't realize. So it's nice to recalibrate sometimes.
Yeah. The other thing that I noticed too is I'm taking activities and thinking, does it need to take this long? You know, like for example, editing, again, a perfect example. I would just sometimes think I need to edit something and then I'd leave it open-ended. 6 hours later, you know, who knows where I am. But certain projects now with more experience, you realize that too. This shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, or this shouldn't, like if it's taking more than 30 minutes, I'm overthinking it. Like just move on, that type of mentality. And that's helped me to reframe and throughout the day, just be more disciplined and focused, because the reality is as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, like you're in the hot seat. So if something is due that needs to go out or a client needs something and you don't deliver, the world doesn't end, but your reputation could suffer.
Sure.
You know, and you are on the line and on the hook for that. So the less likelihood or the less opportunities for those distractions that you can avoid is good.
So just so I'm understanding correctly, so people can come in and use your location to film something. Now, are you the one actually filming it and then you provide the editing services as well? Or do they get the pack? What does the actual back end of that look like?
Well,
the packages, I guess you could say.
The packages, yeah. So we're working on like a service package like that. I am still getting some equipment in, so I'm deciding, should I have separate things with separate things, like, you know, 3 lights and 2 cameras, this amount, or a full setup is this amount. Honestly,
as opposed to what?
As opposed to just someone coming in and having their own equipment, or just renting the space for like $50 an hour, but they can't use the equipment. It's kind of strange because I don't want the equipment to sit there unused. And they're like, well, why can't I use this? I'm renting the space. So these are just things that I was thinking about. So I'm working on a services menu right now, and I'm thinking probably like 3 tiers of services, you know, where, you know, if they want me to assist in some way, I can do that. I don't mind. My lease makes me be on site, so I have to be on the property, you know, while someone is there. So if I am there, I can assist. I mean, if I have to just move a light for someone, I'm not charging for that. But if it's like I'm fully into your production and you want me to do this, that, start the camera, move the camera. So it's all learning, you know, kind of just feeling out how it's going to be. So that's something I'm still working out, but probably by the end of July, I'll have a definite service menu.
Have you heard of the popcorn theory of pricing?
No, but I would love to know.
It's an interesting. So you go to the movie theater, right? And somebody taught me this, so I find it really fascinating. I think about it all the time. So you go to the movie theater, and you have the small, medium, and large.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, small. I don't know. At this point, it's probably $50 for a small. But
Yeah, it probably is.
no, but say it's $5 for a small. The medium or the large is $8, but the medium is $7.50, and it's like the medium's there almost like to push you to the large, where the small is like, okay, the small is so small, but like I probably need a medium just based on like what it is, the services, right?
Yeah.
But for 50 cents more, I could get the large, and that's that mentality of like, all right, I probably don't need the small, I probably want the medium.
Yeah.
But it's just so close to the large, and it's like, what's another 50 cents? And it's like that, but it's a whole psychology behind it. So formatting the pricing structure of like, you know, oh, just for a little more, I get this.
Yeah.
And it's really it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, that's good, because then it keeps you in mind as well. Like, oh, well, he's offering this for only this price, 50 cents more than the medium would be,
Exactly. And
you
I
know.
get access to this, but then
Yeah.
it's an upsell essentially.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
a popcorn upsell.
Yes.
So
Yes. I'm going to keep that in mind and I'm going to work that in.
yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely, for sure. I hope so.
Yeah.
But so what do you see next? What do you see next? I mean, I kind of just also getting started, but what do you see? What's coming next?
I see, well, first of all, my own podcast is called All the Best with Jess, and it focuses a lot on like female-led businesses, entrepreneurs, just really anyone with a story. It's not only female related, but that just tends to be what I was gravitating to. Um, the other thing that is really interesting is that I have a really big passion for accessibility and inclusion. So my space, commercial space, most buildings now, especially when they're built recently, they need to be like ADA compliant. But the reason I chose the space too and why it was perfect is they actually had, like Braille on some of the signage. The bathroom was properly outfitted for someone that uses a wheelchair. My cousin he has something called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and so he uses a power wheelchair. And my thought process was, on social media, we have the ADA for like accessible parking spaces, which is required by law. People still park in them. We see that all the time. But social media is like the Wild West because Instagram doesn't require that the posts are accessible for people with different disabilities. So, for example, hashtags. A lot of people don't know this, but hashtags, they're suggested by Instagram all lowercase. So with someone using a screen reader that might be low vision or blind, or someone that's not using their hands to scroll, it's read as gibberish. So all you do is you capitalize the first letter. Say, for example, like camera guy, you would just hashtag the C would be capitalized, the rest of the words lowercase. G of guy is capitalized, and then it's read as two separate words. That's not really known by many people, and that helps our messages and our content go out to a wider audience. And actually, $13 trillion is left on the table every year globally, simply because brands and businesses do not market to the disabled community. And the disabled community is not just the person who's disabled, but usually their family, friends, people who are involved that prioritize brands that are more inclusive. And if we started doing that, you're going to open up your content to more and more people. Just like creators are now using captions on their videos because they understand if you have it on mute, you can still read it. Well, guess what? If someone is deaf, it's always on mute. So if you're putting captions, you're including them in there, and that's millions of people around the world. So it's just I want to bring that reframing.
So what does that mean? What does that mean? Like, that's super fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly the $13 trillion being left on the table. What does that mean for your business? How do you see on incorporating that?
So other than just my space being available for someone that might use a wheelchair or have other disabilities, on my social media posts, for example, I put image descriptions of, like, for example, if it's an Instagram photo. For people that are blind or low vision, there's a thought that, oh, well, people that are blind, how are they using Instagram? Well, they're doing that because there's a way to use alt text to understand what the image is talking about. So if you have a caption that just says, like say we're sitting here and it's just like, I had a great interview today or something, it's kind of basic.
I hope that's the case. Thank you so much.
I hope so, yeah. And then that's it. But say there was like an elephant in the room or something, that was why it was so great. If you're not describing the fact that there's an elephant in the room, someone who's blind or, has other, disabilities, they don't know that. And that's part of the meat and potatoes of what the post was about, because you want people to see that there was this crazy thing that happened. So it's like 1 or 2 lines, describes the image. And it's really actually important for photographers too, because it's also a different way of describing the work in a verbal way.
How do people access the alt? So I've seen the alt text option. I just never knew anything about it. How does it work on the back end? Like, how do people see it?
So the alt text is a little bit different than an image description. Alt text is more basic. It's more like, 3 people sitting in a conference room. That's all, which is fine. I mean, that can be AI generated. Often they get it wrong though, so it's kind of weird. So I prefer myself to write in an image description that just would say like, 3 people sitting in front of cameras doing a podcast interview. You're still sort of, you're not describing like every hair in my head, but you're getting the gist of what it is.
Would that also help just in general with SEO?
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Absolutely.
So I wonder how much marketing is left on the table just taking the 2 seconds to do that as well.
A lot. And that's why I feel passionately about it, because there are no laws for that. There's no requirement. And I mean, I try to see both sides where it's like you don't want to force people to do something. But back in the past, before they passed the ADA in 1990, accessible parking was looked at as an impossibility. Now it's part of our life.
Part of culture, yeah.
So
it's that's really interesting, actually. Huh.
So it's different.
Yeah.
Side tangent.
It's a really interesting side tangent and a compassionate side or empathetic side tangent. Yeah. So that's something I want to look into a bit more. I know that you're short on time, so I appreciate you, first of all.
Yeah, of course.
But I want to be respectful of the time. So thank you so much for taking the time to come in.
Absolutely.
And I for anybody out there on the Long Island area, definitely go check out Fire Media House, and I will absolutely be stopping by to take a peek at it and see what's going on.
I'd love to have you on my podcast.
I would love to. So please, let's set it up.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
But if you are a business owner or you know any business owners that you think might be a good fit for this show, please consider reaching out and definitely reach out to Jessica.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.